Hello, and welcome to Booked Solid, New Canaan Library's podcast for adventurous readers across all genres. I'm your host, Kathleen, a collections librarian.
And I'm your host, James, a reference and instruction librarian.
And today we are discussing Northwoods by Daniel Mason. So Northwoods is our pick for the 18th Annual Literary Luncheon. Lit Lunch takes place on Friday, November 7th at the Country Club of New Canaan. We pick a book every year and we celebrate it. One of the cool things about this book is that they will be turning the country club into an apple orchard to celebrate Osgood's Wonder Apple. I think it'll be really cool to see an event that has the elements of this book on display in a really cool way.
So before we discuss the book a little bit, I just want to give kind of a non-spoiler plot summary, which is a little difficult to do in Northwood's case. So Northwoods begins with a pair of lovers fleeing a Puritan colony for a new life in the depths of the forests of western Massachusetts. The rest of the book is concerned not with these two people, but rather with the home that they built in the woods and what happens to it in the centuries after they're gone, the lives of the people who come to live in that space, and the surprising ways that the past reaches out and touches the present.
So what did we think?
I really liked this book. I thought that this book was constantly in kind of a state where it was very playful. It was playfully interacting with the reader. It was very meditative at points. I was always surprised by the twists and turns. I felt like I was predicting things would happen in this book. I was thinking, oh, I know what the next chapter is going to be about, and then it would throw me for a complete loop, and I would be delighted with wherever I wound up. I was honestly just genuinely delightfully surprised throughout this entire book.
I think that's a pretty good way to sum it up. I will say I went into this book knowing very little about it. And in fact, I didn't know I knew so little about it until I started reading it, because I think the way it was marketed and it was presented, I knew that it had been like a finalist for the Pulitzer, and I knew it was a very celebrated book focusing on like a house, a plot of land throughout time. And so that was really all I was getting. And I don't think that even hints at what's going on in there. And my favorite thing about this book, I think, and this is what happened right after the first chapter when we go into the Nightmates chapter, is I realized, oh, this book is deeply weird. And I thought that was just so delightful and exciting that it's constantly changing. It's different writing styles. It's a huge cast of characters that are really strange and interesting and wonderful to, dip in and out of. But I don't know that I had any idea what I was getting into. So it was really thrilling and, as you said, really surprising to just see every new chapter, every new page. I didn't know what kind of story I was going to get. And there was so much fun. I think when you said playfulness, like that is really what I get a sense of. And I don't know that anyone told me how much fun it was going to be. So it was just like a great revelation every time. There's so much going on. And it's an adventure.
Northwoods, I feel like, is one of those books where, like I said earlier, a non-spoiler plot summary is hard to do, not because it's hard to talk about the book without spoiling it, but it's one of the books where I think it resists being spoiled because really this book is kind of about the experience that you get while reading it. I truly have in front of me a bullet-pointed list of like what happens in this book, and I could read it out loud to you, and I feel like you couldn't be spoiled. Like it wouldn't be a spoiler because the joy of this book is making these connections yourself and seeing how these different stories tie together and being surprised by the little tiny details that are cropping up.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think, one of the things we've talked about is this truly being an experience. And so I think you either read it or you don't. This is not something you can Cliff's Notes. This is not something that you can just say, oh yeah, I went to the Wikipedia page and I figured out what it is and I can lie about it for my book club. You can't. And you don't want to, because I think those little Easter eggs, those little like, oh, okay, I got into this story and I'm seeing this stuff from this previous story, and oh, these characters don't know that this person lived here, but I know that they lived there. All of those things are a lot of fun. Like you want to have that experience of like, what's going to come in the next story that's going to recontextualize the previous story, and what's maybe like a little seed of something that I'm seeing in an earlier story, and when I get to that part later in another story, I'm going to see that blossom and come to fruition. So you really can't just have a plot for this book. Like it's not about the plot necessarily.
Yeah, it's just such an interesting book, and then it is so surprising and delightful. You really don't know what kind of thing you're going to get. You start the book with a pretty traditional like opening. There's people, they're going into the woods, they're leaving what they know behind. You might be thinking, this is kind of written in period appropriate writing too. The punctuation in that first chapter, very different from following chapters, like the way that things even read and that you're reading them. And then you'll turn the page, and then there's a chapter where it's like, all right, so this chapter is from the perspective of like an apple tree is growing out of a dead body.
Yeah.
And then you turn the page, and it's like a page out of like a farmer's almanac. And you turn the page, and then it is the story of these two beetles who are falling in love. Yeah. And they are going to kill a bunch of elm trees because of this.
Yep.
Inadvertently. And, you know, I could not have expected that. And yet it fits so well because of how Daniel Mason writes and ties these things together.
Yeah. I mean, I was just really excited to talk about it because I think this is a book, more so than even a lot of books that I've read, where you have to talk about it with someone, because I think your favorite characters, your favorite storytelling methods, you know, the voice, these different scenarios are going to be different for everyone. And like the little things that really catch their eye and think like, oh, this is something that is like really spoke to me. They're, I think, probably very unique to each person. So on that note, I think maybe I just wanted to segue into us talking about maybe our favorite chapters or our favorite characters, the things that come up and we're just like, oh, this is a delight.
Sure. My favorite chapter is, I believe the chapter, it's 3 pages long, and it consists of one line.
Yeah.
And the line is like, and lo, with the like leaving of the sheep comes the quiet of the pasture. And then there's a single footnote. And that footnote is 3 full pages on the bottom of the following pages of just a description of basically how all of these invasive plant species find their way to this corner of the world when nothing is really happening at this time around this home. Like, there's no animals around here, really. Like, the sheep are gone. Like, the mountain lion is gone. There's no one here. So nothing happens, right? And the footnote's like, well, actually, a lot of things are happening, and here's how those things happened, and it's just incredible, and you would never expect to find that.
Yeah. And it's funny, too, because you pointed that out, and I was like, oh, I sort of remember that. And it's funny that it didn't even stand out to me so strongly. But what I like about it when I really think about it is just that this is, I think, such a theme in the book on the whole, which is just like either the things that are going on in the background, maybe on a level, because he really pays attention not only to the human inhabitants of a place, but also these plants, also these bugs that are living there. And, you know, so when he does focus on like the beetles or like these different things that you wouldn't expect to have some sort of narrative. And so he has all of these things that are just going on, and you realize that that's what the whole story is about. Like, all of it's important, and all of it has some significance and some resonance on the future that isn't immediately apparent. So like, it's really cool to have that chapter that really emphasizes that and kind of makes you think about it.
And it's just I keep coming back to it, but the playfulness of it
Mm-hmm.
is you turn the page of this chapter and there's a single sentence and you're just like, what? And then you look down and you're like, there's 4 paragraphs here at the bottom of the page. And then you think about it, and it's kind of like, it feels like you're reading a poem sometimes, where it's doing things where, like in a poem where the placement of text is very meaningful.
Yeah.
Whereas you, in this case, like this chapter has the sheep are gone and the pasture is quiet. And from like our perspective, from like the macro, like the larger type of the world, view of the world, this is an abandoned property. Nothing is happening here.
Yeah.
And then in the footnotes it says, just beneath your feet, just outside of your field of view, just outside of your, how would you normally conceive of, the world is arriving here. And it will drastically change for the rest of the entire book until the forest is literally burned clean.
Yeah.
These are going to be part of this place throughout the entire rest of the book. And you put that in your brain, and it just kind of sits there throughout the rest of the book. It's incredible.
Yeah. Yeah, it's wild because, I mean, how often do you read a book and there's just like a line or something dedicated to a period of time where nothing happens? And you think, okay, I didn't need to read about that. I didn't need to know about that. And Daniel Mason's like, oh, you actually do need to know about this. He does a lot of cool things with just different styles. I mean, like as you mentioned, like poems, like there are songs in there. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of like kind of multimedia stuff and a lot of different ways of telling a story that would be appropriate. I read an interview where he was talking about he was reading a lot of like captivity narratives and things, so that inspired like the Night Maid's Letter, which I have such a soft spot for just because that's like the first introduction to like where it's going, and you're like, oh, poison mushrooms, like I didn't know. They're just so many things in here where I'm like, oh, this is a fun, unexpected thing that I didn't know.
I think zooming in on the Night Maid's Letter is actually a good point to kind of let the conversation turn to, because I think that is very emblematic of the kind of skill that is on display here in this book. So when you talk about captivity narratives, the Night Maid's Letter is basically the account of a woman and her baby who are taken during I believe it's a raid during the French and Indian Wars. Mm-hmm. And there are these things called captivity narratives where it's basically like the settlers or people who are the non-native populations of, North America. They get kidnapped by these native populations and then they tell their story. And a lot of times, those are not always accurate, or they're made up, or they're fabricated, or they're embellished, and things like that. So when you can verify that one of these things actually happened, that they're much more valuable as like a tool for understanding what was happening in that time period, how people were living, that kind of thing. So the Night Maid's Letter is the second chapter of the book. Somebody gets taken, and it describes what's happening to them. And she describes what happens, and it's very surprising. Later on, much later on in the book, a couple things happen that bring this letter back into the center stage. Do you want to talk about like how that happens? Because I find it fascinating how many little things have to go right for this to come back into view.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is so far into the future that you're probably not even really thinking about it anymore. You've read many other lives and different experiences in the book, and then we get to, I don't even know, like, is it the 80s at this point?
I think it's like the 80s, yeah.
So this is the 1980s that this is happening. And I mean, to put it into context, the Night Maid's Letter is happening like in the 1700s at some point. And so it's like, and this is a very funny section to me too. So we start out with this speech that is being given by a character named Morris Lakeman.
A disgraced historian.
He's a disgraced historian. And so in his speech, he suggests that he's been allowed back to give this speech and to be the honoree to this historical society he belongs to. And he's talking about how, at this point, the Night Maid's Letter has gained a lot of attention. People are familiar with it. So it was written in like the margins of a Bible, a family Bible, and then discovered, and now it's a text that I think was published to jump around, I guess, a little bit, but was published in a book that was compiled. There's this character, Lillian, who is doing she's writing to like different incarcerated people, and there's like a book that has been published by like her, maybe the leader of the group. But anyway, there's this book that has the Night Maid's Letter published in it, and I think that's where it maybe gets mainstream success.
And they found the original like source of that when they discovered it was in Canada. They discover it in like the original like text was discovered in Canada somewhere, right?
And we're not even describing this badly. It is that circuitous. Yeah. I mean, this is just all the things that have to.
And the reason why it's discovered in Canada is because at one point a woman and her child who were fleeing from slavery lived in the house and discovered the Bible that it was written in there and took it with them when they left the country. And so it's discovered in Canada, and then it gets brought to the attention of this historian who figures out where this might have taken place because he read about it in like a true crime rag, which is another character's perspective.
Yeah, yes. Right, yeah, that was the thing I was forgetting is the true crime. And the whole circumstances of that are it's just so strange because he's like, I was just unwell that day and I decided I was going to spend the day in bed reading these true crime magazines, and it hit me that these different events were everything is connected in the story. You see all of these pieces, but the fact that they would all come together is really wild. But the thing that I love that happens next is that you get to the next chapter and you realize this man has been performing in front of a mirror. Mm-hmm. And he, in fact, was not welcomed back to the Historical Society at all. So he decides to go to this area in Oakfield, Massachusetts, which he's put the pieces together. He's going to find the house in the North Woods, but he goes there alone because he is not able to tell anyone about it, and he gets into some trouble up there.
Yeah, he does not survive his trip, which is another kind of thing that the book, I feel like, comes back to time and time again. There's a lot of surprising deaths in this book.
Yes. Sometimes people don't even know they've died.
Yeah. And it's so interesting in that you start a chapter thinking you know where it's going to go, and then the character will die. Or, like, they'll not find what they're looking for, or they'll find something completely different. And the idea of, you know, what you are bringing to this place, the reason why you're coming to this house in the woods, sometimes it doesn't matter. Sometimes something else is going to happen that's going to throw you completely out of your comfort zone. It's just always so surprising.
Yeah, a surprising number of ghost stories. So, I mean, I think this land is haunted for a number of reasons. Mm-hmm. You know, it has such rich history. And I think one of the things that the book points out is, you know, everything has a rich history, but so rarely are we able to access it. And even the characters, there's a lot of, like, dramatic irony, I think, in the stories.
Definitely.
And one of the things that's really interesting to the characters and to the way the book is structured and how we read it is that we have such a gift of perspective that they do not have. So they are just in such a small slice of it, and we're getting to see how everything is related. But, I mean, there's this one part where there's a character who is a big fan of the poet Erasmus Nash, mm-hmm. who features into this section with this painter, Teal.
William Teal, yeah, who owned the house, yeah.
And she has no idea. She knows he's roughly from that area. She has no idea he has any connection to this house. And we're just, you know, I mean, you're kind of like the audience, like wanting to scream through the book, like, he was there, he visited. I think it's fun because you get that kind of like bird's eye view, like that almost omniscient way to view things. But the characters are very stuck in their own circumstances, so they don't have that. And that was one of the reasons that I kind of thought the ending was really interesting. So we have this character, Nora, who is, I guess, in what you'd call the present day.
Yes.
And so she's going there, to tie it back to the painter William Teal a little bit, she's going back because he has these very, like, detailed nature paintings, and he's given this attention to that kind of detail that a lot of people have not. So she's interested in sort of the science of it all, and she wants to see that area. But on her way, she actually gets into a car accident. And so, like, there's this dramatic scene where she crawls out of a lake, and she's, like, shivering in her sleeping bag. And I don't know if we gave the spoiler warning, but this is a real spoiler. The way that everything kind of comes together at the end is really wild, too, because she is, I guess, rescued or something by a character from way back in the beginning, the Osgood Wonder Apple, Charles Osgood. And, you know, as a reader, you're thinking, well, that doesn't make sense. He's been dead since, like, 1776. And that's because she is also dead. And so you get this ghost character at the end, and then she has this realization that, you know, she didn't survive and she is a ghost. And she's able then to see, like, the area throughout time. She's able to see the chestnut trees, which have died off mm-hmm. because of a blight. She's able to see these previous inhabitants, like the Osgoods and all the other characters we've read about. And so she's kind of then sort of in the perspective that we've been as the reader the whole time of, like, seeing everything and having access to everything. So I thought that was, like, a very cool way to wrap up the book.
Yeah, it's interesting that the book, which is so concerned with the idea of history and place and just the idea of change, things changing and missed connections, to give a character the ability to exist in that place and have the restrictions that time's passage places on, being able to interact with that history, with that legacy, with that reality of what occurred in this place. That's removed. And she basically has full access to go back and forth in some kind of way where she goes back and she hears like Mohican children singing and she sees the chestnut trees, like you were saying. Like she's able to engage with it all. There's no separation anymore. All of that, all of those like misconnections and stuff doesn't matter. She has access to it all. And then she's also there for the end, where as she persists there as a spirit, she sees basically like the fall of society, and then there's a fire and the house burns down. And she's there for that. And then that's the end of the book. And as the book says, it all begins again. It's just coming to that ending. I originally was a little confused. And then I also, after some time thinking about it, I was like, well, how else could you end a book like this than by not removing that last barrier to all of that stuff and thinking about what that would look like and what that means going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think the nice thing about this book is it's dealing with a lot of really complex and weighty ideas, but just because it wants to encompass everything in the world, all this stuff, it doesn't mean that it's not doing it in a way that is so engaging and fun. And, I really was just like, oh, wow, this is like such a great book club book because I just wanted to talk about everything. Yeah,
it's very hard to talk about for the podcast because we do literally just want to talk about everything that we read in the book. It's taking a lot of self-restraint and we're kind of failing a little bit because I'm going to talk about how there's a little aside about how there's a woman who has like a USB drive which has films on it which are from another guy who made films that were trying to capture like his hallucinations and to explain them to people, but his hallucinations were named after people who lived in the house before, so he had some access to it. And it's just like you can miss it if you're reading and you're not paying attention. You miss that little detail, and this is the kind of stuff book groups love to talk about. It's a perfect book group book.
So why don't we talk a little bit about the language and the storytelling style, because I think when we talk about like nature and place and all of this stuff, I kind of see that reflected as well. And I will say, I mean, first of all, I think Daniel Mason does some really great nature writing overall. Mm-hmm. But I just think that he is not only tracking kind of like all of history and the way that like these things,
like the very American history of the place, very particular.
Exactly. So I think that is really reflected very intentionally in the writing. And I think the opening quote is like from Hawthorne, if I'm not mistaken. And I was just thinking as I was reading this, like really tracing it through like these American writers of like who he was reminding me of. And I just think that he is really looking at this tradition in American literature. I mean, sometimes very Gothic, I think. So he would remind me of like Nathaniel Hawthorne or William Faulkner, Edgar Allan Poe, or just kind of like the American romanticism of like Emerson and Thoreau. But he's really tackling like, and as we mentioned, the captivity narratives. Mm-hmm. But I mean, I think he's really tapping into all of that and just feeling very reminiscent of a lot of American literature that you would read in school.
And then he turns around and he hits you with like a really considered like physician's or medical perspective too. There's a whole chapter where it's basically, it's from like a physician's point of view trying to convince a woman to get her son a lobotomy to deal with some mental health issues that he's experiencing. And it reads very true. Like it reads very like as a true thing, like a physician of that time period would be pushing for in that language with those considerations. It feels, there's really a feeling of verisimilitude throughout the whole book. It just feels right.
Which is really interesting now that you mention that, because that would be reflective of his day job, his professional life. He is a physician, but I think the really interesting thing is that he is not writing it as he would treat someone now. I mean, he's thinking, well, what would someone think in this time period? As much as he has that background and is able to draw from that, he's writing from a character who is very different, who's coming from a very different understanding. So I think that's really impressive. That's really interesting. And it's incredible just the number of formats he's dealing with. So, we touched upon some of these, but just the idea of like the epistolary format and then the speech, the songs, magazine articles, case files. None of it feels that it hits like a wrong note. All of them feel like very authentic. I do really love that like pulpy magazine. Like it's so fun. And I think it's really fun too. I think my favorite stories, honestly, are the ones that will track a family or person throughout time a little bit. So I really loved reading about the Osgood family, for example, because you get that first part with Charles Osgood becoming obsessed with apples, which is really great. I mean, it's so much fun, and he's like delusional in the best way.
Yes.
Like you're just all in on that perspective. And then you get to his daughters, and it's so sad, but so engrossing to see like their jealousy and the way they hold each other back, but they're also so close to each other. And then it has that very dramatic ending where, Mary kills Alice, her sister, and then lives with her corpse.
It's a shocking end to what you go into thinking will be the start of a lasting legacy.
Exactly.
They talk about like the Osgood Wonder Apple, and you think that this is going to be a thoroughfare throughout the whole book. It is not.
No, I absolutely thought, okay, everyone's going to know what this apple is. They don't.
The only time it gets brought up again in like a real way is when during a seance, somebody accidentally contacts Charles Osgood who's like, what the heck did you do to my apple trees? Because they were going to cut them down to make room for like a hunting lodge.
Yes.
And then they're barely mentioned again ever.
Yes. And then, so they're like buried beneath the floorboards, which is so gothic.
Yes.
And then there's like that weird slave catcher story, which I also like that he has all these like plot twists and reversals. So that one starts out and he's like listening to, I think someone talk about like being an abolitionist or whatever. And he seems really engaged and you think, oh, he's on their side. Like this is really cool. And then he's this horrible person. He finds the house, which that ties into this weird, so there's also a catamount, which we didn't really talk about.
A catamount or a cougar or a mountain lion.
Exactly. He wanders into the house and sees like parts of sheep and doesn't think anything of it. Well, that's not who gets him. It's the ghosts of the sisters in the floor.
Yeah, because the person trying to escape from, slavery is their guest in their minds.
Yeah, exactly. They're protecting her.
Yeah.
So it's all these like wild, like really fun reversals and things like that. Totally lost my train of thought, even because every time you start on something, you want to just say, oh, but then this, and then, oh, but then that. But what I was saying, I guess, is just that, so I love to see the multiple chapters about the Osgood family because you never know where that's going to go. And the other section that I really loved, even though, it's very sad in a lot of ways, is with Lillian, who's this character is introduced as a child in the seance chapter. And then she's struggling with her son, Robert, who has schizophrenia, and he's the one who makes the recordings in the forest and everything. But it's so interesting because you have these sort of straightforward, serious, I would say more serious kind of scenes with her. And, she's deciding whether or not she's going to have this lobotomy for her son. And she's in the pen pal program that I think we touched upon briefly. And then we get to the next chapter because there's like this weird scene and you don't know what happened where she's meeting this man who she thinks is her son. He's going to come to her house and he's writing to her under a different name and it's different handwriting, but he broke his arm and that's why, and all of these, But then it goes right into this like magazine article. And that's where you get the resolution, which I thought was so fun because I was thinking like, I don't know what happened to her. What happened? And now this is a totally different thing. And then you find out, that's actually still about her, but also about all these other things. And then the police come and they reveal that Harlan Kane is not her son and she doesn't believe them. And they hold up a man who has been torn in half by a catamount. It's so, like, you would never think that you would have a scene like that.
No.
But it's really funny to me because she just wants so desperately to not have it be her son. She's not fazed. Yeah.
She wants the resolution, and the second that she gets a chance to say, oh, that's not my son, she's like, that's it. Yep, absolutely. Perfect. I'll take it. It's great. There's just so much here that is so wonderful and is really just something that you kind of have to experience for yourself.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, so even if you haven't read it, honestly, as much as we're spoiling, none of this will make sense until you read it. So we're not really spoiling anything.
It's hard to spoil. You have to go and basically map out every connection. And it's just a wonderful experience. And I do highly recommend that you pick this up if you haven't already and give it a read.
All right, James. So I think we could probably talk about this forever, but we should move on so that it's not a 5-hour podcast. Did you have a quote for us?
Yes. You're going to see this quote. If you look up this book, this quote is floating around basically all the time when people talk about it for a very good reason, because I think it captures so much of what this book is about. Here's the quote. "The only way to understand the world as something other than a tale of loss is to see it as a tale of change." Which, I mean...
I think, yeah, everyone immediately is like highlighting that because it summarizes so perfectly.
You get to that, and so much of the previous chapters clarifies in your mind, and you go, "Oh, yeah,
right, of course,
yeah, that's right." It's great,
and actually, it's so funny because we didn't have a quote written down, and then I was about to ask you, I need to write down this quote, and I looked back on our shared file, and I was like, it's there, and it's the exact quote I would have put.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's the one. That's the one you go to.
It's the lens with which you can look at the book and be like, oh.
Of course.
Yeah. So, Kathleen, now that we've talked about the book, I think that we should probably get to some read-alikes for this book. Do you have any that you would suggest for people who've read this and like it, or just looking for something kind of like this if they're interested in it?
Oh boy. I do have read-alikes, but I will say that when I first approached this question, I was absolutely panicked because I do think this book is very unique and capturing all of the ways that it brings the reader in and what you love about it. Like nothing is going to hit all of those in quite the same way. But what I was thinking about is what's really delightful is these stories that are so linked and the way they have different resonance over time. And so first of all, I wanted to talk about 2 really critically acclaimed books because I figured you can't go wrong with books that everyone already knows are really amazing. But I think, if you've missed them, they're definitely worth revisiting because they really do have the same appeal, I think, of this book, which is just like incredible writing and stories that just like you can't believe the way that they are intertwined and how they work together. So the first book I wanted to talk about, just very briefly, was A Visit from the Goon Squad by Jennifer Egan. So, this won the Pulitzer in 2011. You've probably heard of it. But if you haven't read it, it's linked stories set in the music industry, and it focuses particularly on the lives of a record executive named Benny Salazar and his assistant Sasha. It covers a variety of settings across the world, different time periods, pivotal moments in the lives of the characters. And one of the things it's probably best known for is a chapter entirely in the format of a PowerPoint presentation. I thought that was a lot of fun when I first read it, and I think it still holds up as just like a really cool, unique way of, presenting part of the story. So if you haven't checked that one out, you definitely should. Second one was Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell. This one came out back in 2004. It was made into a movie, so again, probably pretty familiar, but not everyone's read it. It consists of 6 nested stories written in different genre styles. So, you got like a historical fiction, science fiction, thriller. So kind of similar to what Mason is doing here. It takes place in different locations, time periods. So the way that this one is structured, each story is written in the first section up to like a pivotal moment. And then in the latter half of the novel, the resolutions are revealed in reverse order. So like a really intricate kind of construction. But thematically, I think it also touches upon a lot of the same ideas as Northwoods. So it has that attention to universal human experiences, as well as the way that the world changes and the way that it doesn't over time.
Those sound very good. I really enjoyed Cloud Atlas when I read that, so definitely a recommendation from me as well for that one.
Nice.
With my recommendations, I was a little picky. I took a long time to think about which ones I wanted to recommend for this. And the first one I came up with was The Overstory by Richard Powers. I think that is going to be a very good choice for people who came to this and were enchanted by like the quality of the writing and the idea of multiple perspectives, multi-generational kind of stories. There's a lot of that in The Overstory. It's kind of a book about these different people over hundreds of years who interact with and come to understand and want to more or less protect forests. And then the idea of how these forest ecosystems interact with everything around them. One of the things I also like about the Overstory, much like in Northwoods, is that I was constantly being surprised by kind of where the story's twists and turns went, which is definitely one of the reasons why I recommend this if you kind of like that element of it, as well as with the very beautiful writing. The other book I would recommend is There Are Rivers in the Sky by Elif Shafak. This is a story about 3 people who are living alongside these 2 different rivers, but it's all formatted under the umbrella of the ancient epic of Gilgamesh. Multiple perspectives, much like in this as well, but it also is very interested in the idea of history and life, death, what is and what is not remembered by people, which is kind of something that Northwoods is also very interested in. So if you like that aspect of Northwoods, I would take a look at There Are Rivers in the Sky.
Yeah, that sounds really good. All right, very nice.
Thank you.
All right, so what are we reading next?
So next time we will be reading The Antidote by Karen Russell. Karen Russell is, I think, very well known for Swamplandia, I believe, was her previous kind of really big hit. And this is kind of in a similar vein. But The Antidote, it's a gripping Dust Bowl epic about 5 characters whose fates become intertwined after a storm hits a small Nebraska town. The inhabitants of the town are anything but normal, though. There's a prairie witch, a scarecrow, and a New Deal photographer who has a time-traveling camera. Those are just some of the characters in this book. And all these people need to work together to fight for the future of the town, protecting its secrets and kind of coming to terms with the history of the place that they live in and the possibilities of the future. So yeah, this is a work of speculative fiction with a lot of fantasy elements as well, much like her previous work with Swamplandia. And it is very interested in looking at the past and imagining the possibilities of what might be.
I'm really excited for this one. Yeah, I read Swamplandia. I read Vampires in the Lemon Grove. She has a lot of really quirky, like in the best possible way, stories. So I am so excited to see where this one goes.
Yeah.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Book Solid. We'll be back next month.
Thanks for listening.